Hello and welcome to What the Heckonomics. My name is Jake Lloyd, and I don't really know anything about economics, but I'm sitting here with Brian Finifter. Brian, say hi to the people.
Hello, greetings.
Brian is a economics hobbyist. Is that as appropriate?
An amateur economist, I guess you would say. An armchair economist. Your granddad was an armchair general watching the History Channel or something.
Armchair economist. I like that.
Yeah. So I want to start with the disclaimer that we will always start whenever we do one of these. I have no formal education in economics nor any actual professional training in economics. I'm just an asshole on the internet with opinions who reads and listens to podcasts and watches video and shit. Okay?
And he's going to try to take whatever it is that's in his brain and put it in my brain.
Yes. And if you are wrong at a dinner party because of me, it is not my fault. It is your fault. All right?
In the very first edition, we talked about externality, and I learned all about the unseen costs of interactions.
Yep.
And I feel like I retained that information.
Concept of an externality. Cool.
I feel like that I learned something.
So what is an externality then?
An externality is, I think I just say it, it's the kind of the unseen cost that is not paid by either of the two people within a transaction.
There you go. Yeah.
There were widgets and tractors and toxic sludge, and it was a fun episode. What is on the docket this week, Brian?
So we're recording this on December 11th, I believe is the day today. So in a few days, the FCC and its chairman, Ajit Pai, who you might have seen around on the internet lately, are going to vote to repeal what is commonly referred to as net neutrality, which is a bunch of rules essentially preventing major telecommunication companies from treating different websites differently on the internet. Basically,
so can I attempt to explain this?
Sure.
Just to see if I understand it, and then you can correct me. So from what I understand, net neutrality is, well, again, I'm going to speak in hypotheticals. Let's say I am King Internet, and you
must have a lot of porn.
King Internet, it's almost exclusively porn. Let's say I'm King Internet and I hold the key to the Internet kingdom, and you and two other people
are wandering knights.
Are all wandering knights who need the assets of my kingdom to give to your people. And net neutrality states that I have to give you all the exact same assets, and you guys and I have to charge you the exact same for said assets. But without net neutrality, I could be like, well, you know what? Brian's my actual friend. So you guys have to pay twice as much for my assets, but Brian, you can come in here for cheap.
So that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah. So the main thing I would do is say I would replace assets with in the metaphor, I would replace assets with travel or access.
Okay.
So basically consider, and we'll use an example, also a feudal example, but say I and my fellow traveling knights, we want to go through access to your kingdom and use the roads and the bridges and whatnot.
Okay.
And you go, okay, well, Brian, you have to pay 1 gold coin, but you, Bobby, you have to pay 2 gold coins, right? And so what net neutrality says is you can't charge
common knight names, Bobby and Brian.
Bobby and Brian, yeah. Knights of
the great Sir Bobby.
Knights of the 1980s. Bobby B for the Game of Thrones fans out there. So basically what net neutrality says in this metaphor is that you as the king of the kingdom can't charge 2 people to use the same road a different amount of money. Or give a different speed limit and say, well, you have to walk through it, but you get to gallop through it or anything like that. Everybody wandering through the streets of the internet have to be kind of charged the same and given the same basic access, through the lanes of the internet, so to speak. And so what net neutrality repealing net neutrality will do is allow people allow telecommunications companies to charge people different amounts for using different roads and ending up at different places. And so the way this translates is, the common kind of example is if you want internet access, you might have to pay, you might get Google for the basic rate. But if you also want to use Netflix, you have to pay the telecommunications company more to get the access to the Netflix passage, right? And if you want access to Facebook, the telecommunications company can charge you more just for the privilege of accessing Facebook.
So, and when you say telecommunications company in layman's terms, just for like something that would affect my life, would that be my ISP? Would that be my internet service provider? Okay.
Yeah, it would be like Comcast or
okay. So I have Charter Spectrum. So
yeah.
For example, if Charter Spectrum just had a good deal with Google and I was a real Bing guy, I mean,
Exactly.
you know how I am.
Yeah.
Then and they were like, well, you have to pay an extra $10 to use Bing as a search engine.
But now flip it. Okay. Say that, well, you get Bing for the basic package for free, but if you want to use Google, objectively the better product.
Well, listen.
Yeah.
We all have our own opinions, Brian.
You have to pay more to use the product.
We'll figure out which one is better. I'll Bing it later.
Sure. Just to the fact that anybody says, I'm going to Bing it, it's just sad. But so that's the real danger, is you can basically charge people more or less entirely separate from the quality of that product or service itself, right? So, okay, so Google and Bing, we're going to say, because it is, Google is better, right? And so more people use Google,
right?
And it's in the marketplace, in an otherwise equal marketplace, Google does better because it is the better product and provides more value. But you can decouple that and say, well, the kind of King Internets, King Spectrum or King Comcast or whatever says, well, if you want to go down the Google road, you have to pay 10 gold coins, and you only have to pay 5 gold coins to use Bing.
Right.
So it warps the basic mechanism of the market, which says the better product and the better service does better.
Right.
And it warps that basic truth.
Gotcha.
So what rent-seeking is, and
are you saying rent-seeking?
Rent-seeking. So the term is rent-seeking. And first of all, when you hear rent, you're going to think, oh, I got to pay my landlord rent every month. Throw that out. That's not exactly what we're talking about.
Okay.
That kind of rent can be a kind of rent seeking, but we're actually talking about a different concept.
Okay.
So kind of throw that out if you can. What rent seeking is, and the term rent in this context comes from Adam Smith and Wealth of Nations, first basically economist. And so basically what this concept is somebody setting themselves up as a middleman in any kind of transaction or economic process and charging a fee basically for the privilege of being in the middle of it, essentially. So they're not actually producing any value.
Okay.
They're not saying, here, I've created this value, so compensate me for the value that I've created.
Okay.
They're just setting themselves up in the middle of some other transaction or value creation and saying, well, if you want to do that, you got to go through me. So I'm going to take my cut, even though they're not adding anything.
Isn't that like essentially what like mobsters do in like small town, like Little Italy in New York in the 1930s? Like, it'd be a shame if something happened to you. You pay me for protection.
That is exactly right.
Yeah,
it is fundamentally the same thing as protection money, where the mob boss comes into your restaurant or your store or whatever,
right,
and is not providing you any value, right? They're not saying, I'm going to protect you from the hoodlums, right? Or the street gangs or whatever. I'm not going to actually provide you any value.
Right.
I am going to charge you for the privilege of not taking value.
Right.
And so that's essentially what it is.
Yeah. It's like insurance.
There's actually a very key difference, and so the other thing is that economics and all of this stuff, it's all messy and it's collidable, and it's so none of this stuff is neat and straight lines, right? So throw any idea of like, well, it's not a big messy ball of crap, because it is,
right?
But anyway, there is a key difference between the idea of, say, a rent seeker mob boss and legit insurance. Okay. Legit insurance is providing you value in the sense that it's reducing your risk.
Okay.
So risk is a very real and
it's
quantifiable financial thing.
Right.
It says, okay, I have a 10% chance that I'm going to lose all this money.
Right.
I can't reduce that chance for whatever reason. There's a 10% chance the hurricane is going to come and flatten my building, whatever. Like I can't stop that hurricane. Right. I can only hedge against that event happening that I can't control. Right. So the insurance provides legitimate value in that it's mitigating that risk, right? But the mob boss coming in is not actually reducing any risk. He's not preventing or otherwise mitigating an event that would otherwise happen.
Yeah.
He's just saying, I'm not going to fuck you over
right.
for
X amount of
for
dollars.
X amount of dollars. Yeah.
So it's really just the equivalent of a bully taking a kid's lunch money. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, it's just a bully tactic.
Exactly. And so this basic concept of the mob boss, the bully, also the government bribe, in any corrupt civil bureaucracy, right? Like if you want to do business in China or one of the more corrupt African countries or something, right?
Okay.
Something where the civil civil apparatus, right? The government, like going to the DMV or passport office or whatever, like or getting a business license. There might be the business fee of, I got to pay $50 to get the business license, right? But I've also got to slip the clerk at the desk $20, right? That $20 is a rent seeker in a way.
Gotcha.
It's the patent clerk setting himself up, not providing any value, not saying, I'm going to,
expedite
it, or put it in a fancy folder.
It's simply
or whatever.
Just him saying, "I'm not going to do my job unless you give me this
unless you give me this extra
right.
$20." That's called rent seeking.
All right, so I think I understand the concept of rent seeking as a practice.
So the reason I'm connecting this to net neutrality is because if you go out there, you will see, including Mr. Ajit Pai himself, making this absurd, stupid, awful, terrible claim that somehow by repealing net neutrality, we are getting out of the way of the free market. That's right now the government is controlling the internet, and by repealing net neutrality, we will let the perfect, infallible free market do the right thing and stop getting in its way.
Okay.
Which is absolute total bullcrap.
Right.
Because
it'll just breed corruption.
It will breed corruption, and it will part of what is necessary for a free market to work properly, efficiently, and create prosperity and value for everybody is in preventing the creation and establishment of rent seekers.
Okay.
So the restaurants and stores can only create prosperity and value for themselves and each other because the cops come in and stop the mob boss from taking over.
Right, yes.
And the mob boss from becoming the law.
Right.
Right? So right now, net neutrality stops Comcast and Spectrum and whoever else from essentially becoming mob bosses or rent seekers on the roads of the internet and charging their tolls and their protection money.
Just because they can.
Just because they have the power to, because they've been able to set themselves up in the middle of this road.
And it seems, in an extremely practical thought process, like they already have monopolies over areas. Like the reason I have Charter Spectrum is because it's literally the only thing that I can have here.
Correct.
I can also have AT&T, but what they offer is so, like the speed in this area is so, like you can't even stream something on it. It's so bad in this building, in this area, that my only option to have internet is Charter. Therefore, if Charter if I'm a big Hulu guy, I watch on Let's TV on Hulu. If Charter's like, well, guess what? You can use everything else, but if you want to use Hulu, it's an extra $100 a month. Then, and the number that they put on that is completely arbitrary. Like they can make that up.
Yep. Yes, they can.
Okay.
And remember, that's in addition to what you would pay for Hulu itself, right? Hulu is not getting that $100.
No, they're saying none of that.
Spectrum is getting that $100.
Can I ask?
And Spectrum is getting that $100 for not doing anything.
Right.
Go ahead.
Can I ask you? You mentioned, who's the gentleman that you mentioned twice now? That's mentioned.
Ajit Pai, the head of the FCC right now.
Okay.
The guy who's going to repeal net neutrality.
What is his background? Does he stand to gain in this somehow?
Guess where he comes from.
Where?
He is a former executive. I want to say at Verizon, I think. A high-powered executive at Verizon. And so magically, somehow, he ended up as the head of the FCC. And now, just by crazy happenstance, this is what he's choosing to spend his time and energy on doing.
Okay. So if this gets repealed and all of a sudden Verizon becomes the only viable, internet provider, then clearly we know why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We know.
So he is. This isn't coming from a place of ignorance of how the market works. This is coming from, like most of these sorts of bills, a place of corruption, probably to begin with.
Oh yeah, I would. The only issue I would take there is that corruption and ignorance are mutually exclusive, because they're not.
Right.
I would say that Ajit Pai specifically, and all of these assholes in general, are both corrupt and ignorant.
Gotcha.
They've managed to convince themselves of the moral superiority of their
it's
inherently terrible positions.
So they believe the shit that they spew. You believe?
I think in the most part they do. Yeah.
That's scary.
I think it is for the most part sincere, not entirely sincere.
I almost prefer,
and this is more armchair
opposite.
Psychology than armchair economy,
right, sure.
Economics. But yes, they know what the hell they're doing.
Right.
They really do. There's like, and the tax bill is a different discussion. And if we do a second episode tonight, that's what that one will be.
Okay.
But they know what the hell they're doing.
Right.
In both of these respects.
Okay. So
what do we do?
Yeah.
So I really didn't want this podcast to turn into me bagging on Republicans and libertarians, and
we all knew what it was going to be, Brian.
But at the end of the day, we all knew what it was going to be.
Right.
So the answer to your question is to vote for Democrats.
Okay.
And I say that I'm a registered Democrat. I make no apologies about being a partisan.
Okay.
But the answer is to vote for Democrats.
Okay. What is the other than the individuals, for me personally, it will cost me more money if I'm not a Verizon person, and obviously we're going to use that as the example now, being the information we've just been given. But me as not a Verizon user, all of a sudden it's going to cost me a ton of money to use anything because Verizon's not going to allow, like whatever. Other than that immediate cost on me, the person, how is rolling back net neutrality going to affect our economy as a whole?
So it overall makes everything less efficient.
Okay.
So remember last time we talked about how the fact that when a free market is healthy and functioning and set up properly and maintained properly,
okay,
it really is the most efficient way of creating prosperity and value for everybody.
Okay.
And so that argument made by free market people is correct. Where a lot of kind of the free market evangelists fall down is they hold on to the belief that the free market is always unquestionably, infallibly the most efficient way, even when the market is not working properly, which is possible for it to do.
Right.
And there are people who don't believe it's possible for a market to not work, essentially, right? So to answer your question, what would happen in this case is it would make the markets less efficient in the sense that all the money that you're now paying to Verizon or Comcast, that basically $100 Hulu production money, is now $100 you can't spend on something else, that you can't give to somebody who's actually creating real value in whatever way you want, whether it's
service or what,
the deluxe Hulu no commercials aspect, or the sandwich place down the street that you really like, or gas in your car, or anything, right? That's $100 that you now have to spend on that you can't spend on something else. Now you're just one person, and that's just $100, but you times that by millions of people and billions or even trillions of dollars. That then produces a drag on everybody and everything. That breaks it down, right?
Because so essentially there's just simply less expendable money going around. Therefore,
there's less economic activity. Yeah, there's less what's called discretionary income for people to spend on
discretionary income.
Discretionary income, yeah. Okay. So, and even less income just in general to pay things you have to pay. Your literal rent or your health care premium or whatever, utilities.
Yeah. Okay, so is there more to the rent-seeking that I should learn, that I need to grasp onto?
Maybe. So it's funny that you started off with the feudal analogy, because the analogy that is used by, I want to say, Schiller, who's a famous economist, is the metaphor that he uses is a guy who sets up a chain that spans across a river, right? And so the river is a common resource that anybody can travel down. But once he sets up that chain, if you want to pass that chain, you have to pay him.
Oh, right. On the river, like in a boat.
On the river, yeah.
Not crossing the river, traveling on the river.
Sorry, traveling down the river. Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn style.
Yeah. A little raft.
Exactly.
Stick paddle.
Injun Jim, which is what they called him in my 4th grade Tom Sawyer play.
Oh,
because they couldn't call him the actual name.
Right. Yeah.
Which
of
I
course.
did not.
You didn't know that?
Didn't understand as a kid.
Right.
I remember parents like asking the question or something, but like basically the whole substance of it
Right.
totally going over my head. Anyway,
Of course.
So yeah, say you're traveling down the river, but a guy puts up a chain that spans across the river, and in order to cross it, you have to basically pay him to lower his chain.
Right.
He has not added any value.
No.
He has only put up a barrier, and he's saying, in order for me to remove the barrier and take it back to what it was,
Right.
you have to pay me some money,
Right.
protection money, if you
Right.
want to
Yeah.
use the mob boss comparison. So that's the basics of it. And so the point that I wanted to convey here is that this is not allowing a free market to run.
Okay.
This is breaking a free market.
Right.
Because a free market requires maintenance and protection of itself in order for it to function properly. A free market requires a level playing field, at least to some extent.
Right.
And so it's whether that level playing field is automatic or whether it needs to be created, it has to be there.
Sure.
And so right now, the way the internet is set up, it is a level playing field. What repealing net neutrality will do will remove that even playing field and then give people the ability to put up gates and chains and toll booths and whatnot.
Right.
And it's actually, and we can talk about this in terms of like abstract concepts and macroeconomics and aggregate demand and everything, but it is a legit terrifying thing.
Right.
If, for example, you are like me or like you working for somebody like me,
right,
who owns a small business entirely dependent upon internet sales.
Right.
I run my own business.
Right.
I am not Netflix. I am not Hulu. I'm not even fucking Crackle.
Right. Right.
I'm just one guy, and I do not have the money to pay Verizon
more. Honestly, more. You don't have the money to pay more.
Yeah.
Like the business model is in place in such a way where the reason that your product is the cost that it is because of your costs. And if all of a sudden your costs rocket, the value of your product is no longer worth it to the people.
So one of
exactly.
So one of two things will happen. Either I will go out of business. I'll say, oh, I can't make these numbers work anymore.
Right.
Or B, I will pass that cost on to my customers.
Right.
And then they will do one of two things. They will either say, okay, well, I'll pay that. Or they'll say, hell no, I'm not paying for that. At which point, then I go out of business again.
Especially because that becomes such a hard thing to express. Like, there's no tangible thing for a buyer or consumer to be like, oh, yeah, I see the value in this. Oh, I get it. It costs money to have a website. So therefore, that's not a thing that's in our fucking world right now.
Because exactly because there's no value actually being created. I can't go to my customers and say, hey, we're going to put our games in better boxes. Right. Or we're going to have an extra cool thing that goes into it. And that's why I'm charging more. Right. I will be charging more without actually providing my customers any more value.
Sure.
And that is in that hypothetical scenario, Verizon or whoever sucking up that extra value just because they've been able to put themselves in the way.
Right.
And they're charging for the privilege of getting out of the way.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And that is what rent seeking is. And that is the true danger of repealing net neutrality and what is on the horizon if they actually do.
All right. So let me ask you this question. I'll play like a little devil's advocate here. Is it, I don't know, maybe I just worked it out in my head before I even asked the question. Like, what I was going to get at was, if net neutrality is lifted, okay, doesn't it then fall on the ISPs or whatever? What was the word you were using before?
Telecoms.
Telecoms, to then just provide the best service so that, like, doesn't it fall onto them to not abuse the net neutrality to therefore then have more customers? Like, don't they have to handle it appropriately in order to stay in business? because of the market. Like, I'm arguing their point, I guess. Like,
and it's a fair point. And that's probably the point you would come up with if you were actually
I was
arguing somebody
for it.
And you had any sense of what the hell you're talking about.
Which shows you how little they know, because I clearly know nothing, and I came up with that in 2 seconds. So clearly, if that's their launching pad, then they're fucked.
The problem is they're probably not fucked.
Right, of course. Yeah.
So that is a fair point, right? You're basically invoking the free market again to say, well, but if there's competition and otherwise the playing field is equal, then the telecoms themselves are going to be in competition with each other to provide less service.
Let's just, now, of course, using the example of myself here, I could only have Charter, but let's say that wasn't the option. Let's say Charter is charging for Netflix and all this crap, but AT&T isn't, and maybe I'm more inclined to then just go to AT&T instead of paying the extra shit.
So let's start here. So first of all, we only have one basic option in any given geographical area, right? And that's a monopoly.
Right.
And generally monopolies are bad because there's no competition and it prevents this kind of even playing field from existing, right? And that's why monopolies are by and large illegal, and the government prevents them.
Right.
They are allowed in certain cases, historically, for specific reasons, and they're usually public utility monopolies. So, in other words, everybody needs to have electricity or running. Let's just stick with electricity.
Right.
But we can't have the power lines of 10 different power companies running all over the place. It's just too much crap in the streets.
Too much crap in the streets. I love the way you put that. Yeah.
So,
I don't know why you just became like a black comedian in the 80s for a second there. I don't know why that delivery was just like, there's too much crap in the streets.
I'm going to leave that impression to you. So, yeah, for that reason, for the reason of specifically there would just be too many power lines. The government steps in and says,
it's a nuisance.
We're gonna let one company have a monopoly in exchange for giving a monopoly to that one company. We're gonna keep a real close eye on them, and that's how we're gonna keep that balance, right? And it's not an ideal solution, but technological wise, that's how we had to do it because that's how electricity works.
Right. There's limitations on that.
Exactly. And so when phones came along, the same basic thing happened because you also couldn't have phone lines running into every house, or 5 different phone lines running into every house. So you basically set up the same thing with phone lines.
Right.
Now that cell phones are kind of the primary communication as opposed to landlines, that's lessened somewhat because now AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile and Sprint can all have coverage on the same areas.
Right.
Even though they still need cell phone towers, and so that still needs to kind of be...
there's still physical structures, but it's not literally a cable connecting every single human being in the world.
Exactly, and every single street and every single household.
Although it is for, like, in-home internet. There's not, like...
Well, and so that's the next step, right? Now we have internet and cable and whatever tube that brings in all of your...
Entertainment,
internet connectivity. It's still the same basic situation. We still can't run and be running lines all the time, right? So we still sort of had that kind of like, it's a monopoly, we're going to allow it kind of situation.
Right. Okay.
However, it's not as bad, or it doesn't need to be as bad as the phone lines and electrical lines had needed to be. So we sort of have a situation, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in all the finer points of this, but we sort of have the kind of like tradition of this public utility monopoly set up because of electricity and phone lines that's kind of carried over to internet lines more than I think it needs to. And again, I'm not going to at all try to claim to be an expert on on the minutia of this. But as a result, we have only one option for this stuff, even though we could have more.
Right.
Whether we could have enough to have like a real market and a market that's actually competitive and a market that's competitive everywhere. So like maybe Los Angeles, we could have 5 companies and we could have basically a functioning market where they're actually competing with each other.
Right.
But go to West Virginia, it's just not going to be worth it.
Right. Yeah.
It might be, from a business standpoint, it might not be worth it for 5 companies to all compete.
Right.
And so
there's still not enough people to make you running your shit worthwhile. You're not going to make the money.
And that's actually the problem that we're seeing pop up in healthcare right now, is that there are large swaths of the country where it just doesn't make economic sense for more than one health health insurance company to be in a particular area.
Right.
And so the market breaks down.
That's sort of like the core concept of supply and demand. There's not enough demand to warrant more supply.
Correct.
Or a variety of different people supplying.
Or enough people demanding it to cause enough companies to supply it to create a healthy market. Because again, a market is, when it's functioning properly, the most efficient way. But there are various ways in which a market can break down. And one of those is there's just not enough companies competing to cause that kind of chain reaction where they're trying to best the other one by lowering their prices and increasing their value. Right. So you need the companies actively fighting to offer the best value at the lowest price.
Sure.
But if you have too few companies, and not even necessarily just one, like just one definitely will do it. But you can have 2 or 3 or 4 and still end up in that same scenario where they're not really vying.
Right. There's not a real competition there.
Exactly. And if you have enough, eventually you'll get real competition.
Right.
But it's not a guarantee. It's not a given.
Sure.
And the fewer the companies you have, the more likely you are to have an inefficient situation.
Gotcha.
So we could have more competition in telecom than we do right now.
Right.
Whether we could have enough to create a real market situation, and whether we could have enough everywhere, I think are open questions. Again, I'm an armchair person,
right?
But that's kind of the state of things.
Let me ask you this question, just because I feel like it gets thrown around a lot, and I don't think that we, or at least let me rephrase that. I don't know. I know that I don't really know what it means versus just a thing that we say. The term utility. Mm-hmm. We consider water, gas, electric, garbage, whatever, like utility. Those are utilities.
Yeah.
And with utilities, it seems, I could be wrong about this, that there comes a different set of law and a different set of governing. Like there are things that have to be, what's the word I'm looking for here? There are more
provided.
Codes
it's a right versus a privilege.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Or luxury, if it's a better word.
So is internet considered a utility at this point, or is it considered a luxury?
So it's actually a really interesting question. I would say, first off, that whenever you're putting a label on anything, you always have to understand that the label is man-made. It's human-made. It's something we're putting on top of. Right. And ultimately, it's whatever we commonly decide it is.
Right.
If we decide it isn't, then it's not. If we decided, and there, one decision is better than the other, but it's ultimately what we decide.
Right.
I would argue that yes, now the internet is a utility. It is so integral and necessary to living for the vast majority of people. Yeah. And in 1993, it was not.
Right.
In 1993, I think you could say, oh yeah, it's absolutely a luxury.
Yeah. And so was my statement about there being, that was like my guess at what a utility was, what I just said. Like, is it more highly governed? Like, are utilities things that are more controlled by the government and there are more
yes, at least in
laws and rules,
theory, or like it should be. And it is in some cases. Like, yeah, so like electricity,
right.
And I don't actually know what the like specifics of it are. Like, if there's any law in the books that says every citizen of LA County or California or the US must have electricity.
Well, trust me, as a guy who's had his electricity shut off many, many times, they have no problem with that.
Yeah. So I don't know like what the actual laws say.
Right.
But yeah, there is a distinction that says, yes, these things are so fundamental and basic to living in the modern society and
that might come down to
they deserve a special status.
And that might come down to like local laws and like state laws versus, I'm sure like I don't think I could only assume that if you live in, a place way up north, like they can't legally shut your heat off.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like I've heard that in something somewhere. Maybe it's bullshit. Maybe it's not true, but like,
I think
certain places, they might have different rules depending on like local laws and state laws.
Exactly.
Right.
But yeah,
internet as a utility, I agree. You agree. Can we get this going, everybody? Like, how do we?
So,
and also, if it is a utility, what changes? Does anything change if all of a sudden everybody goes, all right, everybody, big announcement, America, hey, you, get here. Hey, Wyoming, somebody get Wyoming, get back here. Hey, everybody, internet's a utility now. Okay, everybody good? Now what changes? Anything?
Right. And again, I think it comes down to whatever laws get written.
Right.
So just calling it a utility or not is just a label that we're throwing on something.
Gotcha. So the word is sort of just this arbitrary thing that we call stuff.
As far as I know.
Right.
Again, I'm not an expert on the finer points of legal definitions relating to utilities. But so this is a good kind of, so we're ragging on free market evangelists and libertarians a lot, which I will do all the time, unapologetically and enthusiastically. But there is kind of a flip side to this that is more from their angle. So another way that you can have rent seeking and kind of end up with this inefficiencies is you can have what's called regulatory capture.
Okay.
Which just means a business essentially manages to buy out, and this is exactly what's happening with net neutrality.
Okay.
Manages to buy out the regulatory agency that's supposed to be policing them.
Okay, gotcha. Right.
So,
right.
So Verizon has essentially spent enough money to buy the FCC, and now the FCC will do what it wants.
Right.
Even though what's good for Verizon isn't good for the economy as a whole.
Sure.
Verizon
doesn't matter. It's about making money for this one very specific company and 4 dudes probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened with the housing crisis. Like the housing market, the derivatives market, essentially took over the agencies that were supposed to be regulating them. And if you watched The Big Short,
I didn't get a chance to watch that, but I do want to.
You can kind of see that in action
Gotcha.
pretty well. But so those are big examples of it. But it can happen at all levels. So you can have basically let's say hair licensing or beauty salon licensing, makeup and hair and whatnot. Like you need to get a license to do that in most places.
Okay.
Or you need to have a taxi badge, get a badge to run a taxi company, right? A taxi medallion. And there's all sorts of arguments, and a lot of them are very valid in terms of why we need to have some kind of licensing and gatekeeping for certain services. Like if you go into a doctor or you get a surgery, you want to make sure that somebody has checked that doctor is a doctor, right?
You need to be licensed to be a professional wrestler in states.
There you go.
You need a New York State license to be a professional wrestler.
There you go. There's a great example.
Right.
And so there's all sorts of that kind of thing.
Right.
That it's very, very debatable and down to the case-by-case basis as to like what social good is really being protected by having a license to protect it.
Right.
And like how much harm is being caused by throwing up those roadblocks versus how much you're protecting the public good by having those roadblocks.
Right.
And it's always a balance, right? Are you doing more or less harm by throwing up this obstacle or tearing down that obstacle?
Right.
But what will happen a lot of times is this particular industry will capture the local or the governments enough that they throw up these licensing and regulatory obstacles, not for any kind of common good, but to make it more difficult for competitors to enter the marketplace.
Gotcha.
So if I'm an established hairdresser,
right,
and I've got a successful hairdressing business, it's in my interest to make it harder for other people to jump into the hairdressing business.
Right.
And one way I can do that is by lobbying the city councilman to make it harder to get a hairdressing license.
Right. Oh, okay.
So
gotcha.
So now it's more expensive. It costs more money and more effort and more time for a competitor to jump in, which makes it less likely that they will jump in.
Right, of course.
Which hampers the effective functioning of free market.
Okay. Just because you mentioned a taxiing license, this sort of a big problem with like the Lyft and Uber situation?
So this is a big aspect of Lyft and Uber.
Like whether or not these companies in their entireties are even legal because of the laws put on taxi cab companies.
Yeah. And so...
by the way, who calls it a taxi cab? What kind of man from New York in 2017 uses the term taxi cab?
I think Bob Hoskins from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I think that's the last person to unironically.
Perfect.
And within the context of the movie, not Bob Hoskins the person.
No, the character.
As the character, as Valiant.
Perfect.
Anyway, so yes, so you're exactly right, and that's a great example of where in lots of places, and most famously in New York City, the taxi cab, which is described as a cartel, had been set up for many, many years to protect itself as an industry and to make it really hard for other people to come in, enter the scene and create competition. to the point where taxi medallions themselves were an investment vehicle. People would, and I just realized I made a terrible pun there.
Right. Yeah.
An investment device. Yeah,
Sure,
not
there
literally
you
a vehicle as in a
Right,
cab.
Right.
But I'm going to buy this medallion
Because it's an investment.
with the expectation that 10
will
years
make
from
me
now
money.
it's going to make I can sell it and make money.
Right.
And Uber fucked that up for a lot of people.
Okay.
When Uber came in, it crashed the value of those medallions that
Right.
some people had been buying, and like that was their retirement plan.
Right.
That was their retirement account. Was I'm going to buy
Right.
this medallion for 200 grand, and it's like some crazy amounts these medallions have gotten to.
And the medallion is their ability, their public license to operate this
A taxi cab in New York City.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah. So they would, a lot of people's plan, especially immigrants.
Right.
Their plan was like, okay, I'm gonna save up and get this badge.
Right.
I'm gonna run a taxi for 10 or 15 years or whatever it is, and then I'm
Right.
gonna sell it, and that's my life
when
savings.
When you say sell it, you mean like selling the company?
Selling the badge, the medallion,
So that
license from the city that says you get to.
It's transferable? That seems weird.
It is, and I think, and I'm not gonna pretend to know
more,
the details.
But yeah, that seems really bizarre. Like,
yeah.
But I get it though. Regardless,
Yeah,
for whatever reason, so it is a literal physical medallion. It's not just like, oh, the thing that hangs in the back office behind Danny DeVito in Taxi. Like,
I think it's both. I mean, you have to
Right.
hang it in your car,
right.
but it's paperwork.
Gotcha.
Ultimately, it's a
Paperwork,
license.
yes.
Whether it's an
Bureaucracy.
actual metal badge, I don't know.
I like to think so. It's
I'm
got
sure
like,
it probably is.
it's got like little checkers on it.
Well, it is the thing that's in the
Right.
that they had to put in the back window, right? Whatever that is.
Sure,
Whether
sure.
it's a sticker or an actual medallion.
Right.
But yeah, Uber
It
majorly
was like,
fucked it.
we don't
fucked
need
it up.
badges. Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
And
is,
Uber has, like Uber and Lyft and all the rest of them, have entire very well manned legal departments that all they do is fight these battles
Right.
in every city that they operate in.
And what was the governing group or whatever you want to call it that was watching over these badges? Like, who do I buy the badge from? Am I buying it from the city of New York? Am I buying it from the DMV?
No, I
like-
think it's the again, I don't know the
Right, of course.
but I think it's
the-
like there's a city cab commission.
So
or
the
something.
reason I asked that
part
then,
of city government.
So the reason I
believe.
asked that then is that if that's part of government, is you need these badges, then is like our Uber drivers, obviously I'm sure a lot of this has already ran its course and there's been resolve and stuff like that, but early on, let's say, week 1 of Uber in New York City, like were Uber drivers in risk of being arrested? Is it the sort of thing that you is like an offense?
I don't know about arrested, but like beat up by actual cab
No,
cabbie
yeah, that's the
drivers?
thing. I'm talking about legal ramifications. I'm not talking about personal, like, again, that's more of the interpersonal business to business relationship. I'm talking about like clearly they've bought these medallions from a governing agency
yeah.
because it's illegal to have a taxi without this medallion. But if I'm a day one Uber driver,
I
when
don't
Uber
know.
launched, could I get pulled over and then they'd be like, "Are you chauffeuring people?" And me being like, "Yes," and then being like, "Okay, well, let me see your medallion." And then you go, "I don't have a medallion." They go, "All right, I'm gonna need you to step out of the vehicle." Like, is that a thing that happened?
I don't know if
Yeah.
that has happened. I guess theoretically it would have been possible. Uber's
Because if not, then what is the true value of the medallion then? Like if people
well, that's the
can't-
thing.
right.
The value of the taxi cab medallions collapsed specifically because of Uber and Lyft.
right.
And Uber's argument has always been the people who drive for Uber are not employees.
Right.
Uber is not a taxi cab or car service.
Right. They don't own their vehicles. They don't
Right.
own. Yeah.
Uber has always said what we do is we help connect drivers and passengers.
Sure.
Right. They are the connector between the two through
Right.
the app.
Yeah.
And it's
They're the missed connections of taxi cab
And-
not taxi cab of ride share.
of ride sharing. Yeah.
Right.
And this is why they make that and that particular
Right.
stance is because that's
Because maybe the law states you cannot operate a taxi company,
And
but
it's
they're
a-
not taxiing. They're just friends. Who
they're
are
just
helping each other out.
connecting people with
Right.
cars to people who
Oh,
use rides.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's kind of a very thin
I mean,
little regulatory lane that they're in.
Sure. When I first moved out here to Los Angeles, my family, my brother and his family are in Las Vegas, and I did that drive constantly when I first got out here. And it was just one of those things where I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna jump on Craigslist and check out the ride shares. because I can make $30. You know what I mean? Or someone could pay my gas just to get there.
Yeah.
And I did that constantly. I would just find somebody who needed a ride to Vegas and then just do a quick ride share.
And that's Uber's argument, is that they're facilitating that.
Right. So
not competing directly with taxis.
The reason I say that is because technically then Craigslist is the same organization as Uber, really, way less efficient, but it's still doing the same purpose. It's connecting the driver with the person.
And Airbnb is making the same argument. They're saying, we're not a hotel company. We're not a property rental company.
Because we don't have that hotel license.
We're connecting people who have couches with people who need couches.
Wow. Interesting.
And so, and that's the other thing is a lot of this stuff, it's, again, like I said, none of it is neat. None of the lines are clear and distinct. It's all just messy, chaotic crap that collides into each other.
So can you just I feel like we discussed two completely different topics there, and now my brain is trying to recall what the connection was. So what we're talking about right now,
good luck.
what we're talking about right now with the medallions and the rideshare stuff, like how did that connect with net neutrality and with rent-seeking?
So rent-seeking. So it connected through regulatory capture.
Regulatory capture.
So saying that basically an industry can capture, quote unquote,
the
regulatory agency that it's supposed to be guarding it.
Gotcha.
And taxi cabs and medallions and Uber crashing that is one example of
so that. If we let's we're sort of at the end here. Let's go full circle. King Internet, as I am King Internet. I did have to answer to the Grand Emperor. Of the land.
Let's do it this way. I think I got it. So going back to the king emperor feudal analogy, right? So you're the king of this king, and you basically control all the roads and access to the roads, right? And so people have to come to you and pay you money to use your roads. But then all of a sudden, somebody invents a jetpack, and they don't need your roads anymore.
Oh,
right. And it's kind of weird because they're jetpacks in this feudal society all of a sudden.
So weird.
But that doesn't change the fact that these guys, they don't need your roads anymore to get from A to B.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you have no power. And so the first thing you might do, or the people who are propping you up might do, is try to ban jetpacks.
Right.
Even though the jetpacks make everybody's life better on net,
sure,
they fuck you over pretty hard.
I hate those goddamn jetpacks.
And you had a pretty good gig going on.
And meanwhile, for the past 25 years, I've been trying to figure out how to fly this dragon. And this guy's just created a jetpack. My dragon project has been obsolete. I put so much money into this dragon project.
You're right. You should use dragons.
Yeah.
Personal dragons. One-man dragons, I guess. I don't know.
That's all right.
Anyway.
Hey, who didn't like the Rocketeer?
Okay. So that's the extension of that analogy.
And ultimately, the end, to close that analogy, it would be me figuring out again, like the chancellor, whoever I have to answer to, and buying out them who makes the laws that gets the jetpacks.
Yeah. So now it gets originally our analogy, you were the king.
Yeah, but there has to be somebody I answer to.
Yeah.
In order for this one to work. Yeah.
Exactly. So now in this analogy, we've made you kind of the vizier or the, what's the guy? We've made you the hand of the king. Let's just go with Game of Thrones and make it easy. We've made you the hand of the king instead of the king.
Okay, fair.
So now you have to answer to the king.
Right.
And the king's like, dude, where's all the money that we were bringing in? And you're like, jetpacks, man.
Yeah, that's right.
And the king's like, what the fuck are jetpacks? And so you basically have to capture the king.
Right.
And control
the laws he makes.
Controls the landscape that you operate in through the king.
Yes. I have to make this king.
Yeah.
We gotta get
Listen,
rid of
king, you have to ban jetpacks because they are a threat to the kingdom.
Right. Yeah.
And then, go from there.
Right. Well, it was a lot more muddier than
the first one.
Then what do you call it?
Externality.
Externality. But I get it. I mean, they're pretty simple concepts, to be honest with you. It's finding the way that they connect.
Yeah.
That becomes sort of like, oh, okay. Like you have to sort of put those pieces together a little more carefully.
So all it is, all rent-seeking is at the end of the day is somebody setting themselves up in the middle of a transaction going, you're not going to get to do this unless you pay me my share, even though I'm not doing anything.
Which is what we have to look forward to in the world post net neutrality.
Correct.
Which you think there's a good chance we will live in.
At least for the time being, yeah, because there's really no way to, because it's an executive branch decision.
Right.
There's really
there's nothing that we the people are voting on.
Right. There's other than just pure public outcry, which I encourage everybody to do, especially if you're a business owner on the internet.
Right.
I have despite being a very political-minded person and having strong political opinions, I fastidiously avoided bringing those opinions into my business. For this, I think I will.
Right.
I've been debating that internally, whether or not to do that.
Right.
But because it has such potentially huge ramifications for how everything works.
I mean, is there anybody in the general public that's like, yeah, I can't wait for net neutrality? Like, it has to only be the people that are wanting the law to be passed in government. It's not like, this isn't like a bipartisan issue.
No.
This isn't like that sort of thing where it's like, well, listen, God believed in net neutrality and I'm a Christian, so I have to stick with my beliefs. Like,
well, the Second and a Half Amendment guarantees us all.
Right. It just doesn't. Doesn't exist.
No.
So there literally no person on your Facebook wall that you generally argue about has a reason to be pro net neutrality,
except the people who buy into the really terrible you get out of the way of the free market.
Right. Which
is exactly why I wanted to sit down and do this episode.
Right. So net neutrality, good.
Yes.
Post net neutrality, bad.
Yes. And I encourage everybody to do what they can, especially if you have a Republican representative or senator or anything, to write them, to call them, to go to their town halls. If you live anywhere near Washington or will be visiting Washington, I will actually be there very shortly. Go to the halls of Congress and make your voice and your presence known.
Right.
Do whatever you can. But most importantly, next November, get out and vote. And vote for the candidate on your ballot that will support net neutrality. And I'm not sure, honestly, what we can do before then, unfortunately.
Right.
But if we can elect enough pro-net neutrality representatives, then we can write laws that will make a difference.
Despite the fact that it may be inevitable in the short term.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you guys listening learned something. I learned some stuff. Thank you once again, Brian. How do people find you on the internet?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Well, first you have to go to Verizon and pay the money.
By the way, this podcast brought to you by AT&T. No,
yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Brian Finifter, BrianFinifter.
And you can find me on Twitter at Liquid Jake. We do not have a Twitter account for the show. It seems sort of redundant currently, but you can use the hashtag Heckonomics Podcast or Heckonomics Pod. And we are spelling it HECKONO. There was some talk about whether or not it should be an O or an A.
Yeah.
Heckonomics, the same way that economics is spelt. If you're listening on iTunes, or honestly anywhere, Stitcher, Castbox, whatever you're listening to, every single service has a review functionality. Throw us a review. 5 stars is always nice. An actual
4 stars go to hell.
4 stars go to hell. 4 stars, I hope net neutrality is banned and you have anything but Verizon. In any case, leave us a good review or leave us a bad review. Just leave us a review. That's what we care about. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you think about this. If this gets up beforehand and we don't have another episode beforehand, I want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, a happy holiday, a happy New Year.
Hanukkah.
A happy Hanukkah. When does Hanukkah fall this year?
And
it's early,
it starts
right?
in a few days, yeah.
Yeah, it's very early. This probably won't go up before Hanukkah.
I think it's
so. I hope you guys
13th.
Hope you guys
next few days
all had a happy Hanukkah, since this will probably come up after that. And lastly, I just want to talk very quickly about the podcast network that What the Heckonomics is on. We are part of the Dragon Wagon Radio Podcast Network, which is a completely independent collective of podcasters. Just because we're independent doesn't mean that we will be anything but free. Dragon Wagon Radio is always dedicated to be completely free to listen to, always and forever. But if you are feeling generous, after all, it is the holidays, and you do want to support this awesome independent network, you can check out the Amazon wish list for Dragon Wagon Radio, and you can gift something that is directly needed. There are items on the wish list, both big and small, from teepee and coffee to keep people in the studio happy and well-wiped, to replacement microphones and cables and electronic gear that we need to produce high-quality content. No matter what your budget is, there is something on there for you, and it can be shipped directly to us. It is by and far the best way to support Dragon Wagon Radio. Simply search for Dragon Wagon Radio on Amazon's wishlist feature, or make it easy. Go to dragonwagonradio.com/donate. click the link that's right on that page and spread the love. It's the best way to show your support. We greatly appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed listening, and I look forward to learning some more. I hope you guys enjoy it too.
Bye.
Hey guys, I'm sitting down with Zen Zenith, host of the House Show Show.
That's me.
That is you. Tell us a little bit about what the House Show Show is.
All right. Well, the House Show Show is a live event series and podcast where I have different guests on each week. So like in the first episode, we had Tiny Stills, who's this awesome singer-songwriter from here in Los Angeles. And she came on, played a couple songs, real stripped down, intimate style. And then I sat down and chatted with her and did a Q&A with the audience. And it was a lot of fun. We talked about depression, and we talked about what her songwriting process is, and how she really wants to write songs that make good AIM away messages.
That's fantastic. So you're not afraid. You're not afraid to get serious.
Yeah.
Not afraid to have some fun.
Yeah. It's it's a live show, so anything can happen, which is part of the fun of it.
It is such a fantastic time. I really do urge everybody out there to check out the House Show Show. You are just absolutely killing it.
Thanks, Jake. I appreciate that, man.
How do they listen to it?
They can check it out online at thehouseshowshow.com or subscribe to us for free on iTunes and Stitcher.
It's Dragon Wagon.